Welcome to this module of Professor Messer's free CompTIA A+ certification training course on the A+ Toolbag. I'm James Messer, and in this module we're going to look at the requirements from our A+ practical application exam, which is 22702, section 1.4, where we have this big tool bag of things that we'll need to be sure we are familiar with: a multimeter, a power supply tester, some specialty hardware, some cable testers, and much more. We'll go through all of that in this module. A multimeter is really a Swiss Army knife to a technician. It provides you with so much functionality. You can measure voltage and current and resistance and so much more. Figure out the continuity of a cable. And the real nice part about multimeters is you can really find one relatively inexpensively. This is something everybody should have. Even if you're just testing to see if a battery is good or not, this really is a valuable tool. You can find them for $5. You can find them for thousands of dollars, United States currency. My multimeter was about $10 to $15. It was something that was relatively inexpensive. Got it on sale, bought it over the internet, and now I use it all the time. It's become a very, very invaluable tool to me because it can do so many different things. I can check power voltages, both AC and DC. I can look at how the CMOS battery is running inside of my computer, or just the batteries that I use outside of my computer for other things. I can look at continuity. I can really see, does the pin on one end of the cable really connect to the pin on another end of the cable, and make sure that it is wired properly and that my cables are working the way I would expect. I can also look at fuses, another great use for continuity. Make sure that the fuse on one side and the other, that they're connecting. If I've blown a fuse, I'm not going to get any continuity through those connections. Multimeters come in all different sizes, different shapes, different functionalities. If you just get a good all-around multimeter, you'll probably be in pretty good shape for troubleshooting anything you might run into inside of your computer. If you work a lot with cables, especially network cables, you know that sometimes you're just kind of eyeballing things. You're looking at two ends of the cable to see if they match up. There's also some automated ways to do this. You've got cable testers that you can plug into a connection that will tell you more about what's going on. This happens to be a very detailed structured cable tester that will show you all the pinouts, how it's wired. It will tell you if two pairs are shorted together. It will tell you how far down the line those two pairs are shorted together. Pins 1 and 2 are shorted at 36 feet down the cable. So I can go 36 feet down, take a snip, put a new connector on the end of that and retest it and see if it really comes out and works better that time. There's some also simplified cable testers that you could plug in one side and the other. Notice there is a master and a remote. So if the cable's already run through the wall, you can plug one into one side and you can plug the other side in and see, are you really getting continuity between all of those? Are you really getting a connection through all of those pieces of the cable? Make sure you've taken these cables and you've crimped them properly, or you've punched them down properly. It's a great double check to see what's going on, and it's all done automatically with these cable testers. We can certainly use our multimeter inside of our computer to test power, but there are also some power supply testers that can really do this automatically for us. We plug in our power supply, we plug in the floppy connectors and SATA connectors and other connectors that might go to our motherboard and see if we're really getting the right kinds of power through there. It's really testing a lot of different connections all at once, something that would take a bit of time if you had a multimeter to go to each one of those connectors and test it. When you get into things like these SATA connectors, it becomes a little more complicated because they're very, very tiny little connectors on that SATA power display. These dummy lights that are up here, they call them dummy lights because any dummy can read these. If it's on, then you can see that it's lit, and if it's off, you can't see that it's lit. So it makes it very easy to know, am I getting 12 volts? Am I getting plus 5 volts? Am I getting negative 12 volts? I can see exactly how my voltages are going through there, and these are relatively inexpensive. I think this one is about $20 US to be able to have, and for that price, if you're needing to troubleshoot a lot of power supplies, it can save you a lot of time. You're also going to need some type of specialty toolkit as well. You will need to take apart a lot of different computers, a lot of different components inside of those computers. You need to install a motherboard. You'll be dropping cables. You'll be dropping screws. There'll be a lot of different tools that will help you with that. So you'll need a smattering of different kinds of screwdrivers. You'll also may want to consider getting a toolkit that has things like chip pullers inside of it, a place to store all of these screws. There's even things like this that have a magnet at the end which is something you do want to be very careful around your computer components because magnets are bad things, which is why a lot of people will use these cable pulls and these connectors here to get the screws that have dropped. They've got an arm that will reach out, a claw on the end that will grab the screw if you drop it between all these little tiny components on a motherboard. That's come in handy for me many times. So make sure that add this to your tool bag to make sure you have all of the right screws, screwdrivers, and other components you'll need to work on anybody's computer. If you're working on troubleshooting an individual port, you may want to consider having a group of loopback plugs available. Loopback plugs do exactly what the name sounds like. Data goes out a plug, it loops back and comes right back in again. And if you're needing to test different ports like serial connections or network connections, this is really useful. Now, these are not crossover cables. You may have heard that term as well. Crossover cables are used to directly connect two devices to each other. This is a little bit different. This is one port where the data is simply going out a couple of pins and coming back in another couple of pins. It's not a big cable, doesn't connect anything else, just plug it into a connection and you're done. There's a great website where you can make your own Ethernet cable, crossover cable, null modem cable, Cisco console cable, and much more on the spacehopper.org/5in1, and you can build some of these loopback plugs and specialty cables yourselves. It's a nice test to be able to see if you're able to make a cable properly, and then at the end of it, you've got some very functional cables you can take along with you. And some of these are very tiny. They're just interface cables, so it also becomes very easy to transport, perfect for your tool bag. When you're working with these components that are inside of your computer, another nice thing to have in the tool bag are things like anti-static wrist straps. Especially if you're in an environment where you're moving around a lot, you want to be sure to keep the same electrical potential between yourself and what you're working on. These wrist straps can be very useful for that. And they've got this nice alligator clip at the end. You just plug it onto a piece of metal, put this on your wrist, and now you're covered. You know there's not going to be any electrostatic discharge and create any problems with any of the components inside of your computer. If you're working at a workplace that has a much bigger work area, maybe it's at your workbench, maybe you just want to put down an anti-static pad, and the entire thing that you're working on will sit right on top of this pad. You know you're always touching the pad, you know that the components you're working on are on this pad, and therefore you're also keeping down the circumstances where you might have static electricity discharges. Some people will have this on the floor. They'll have entire mats. So everything that you're standing on, everything connecting to what you're standing on is also being anti-static through the floor mats themselves. So another way that you could keep and make sure that you're keeping the circumstances of the static discharge, make sure the anti-static's working properly for that. If you're carrying a device from place to place, an adapter card or a component, put the adapter card inside of an anti-static bag. This is a great way to protect these devices so that as you're walking around, opening doors, especially in environments where there's not a lot of humidity, you can make sure that whatever's in this bag is still protected from anything you might be doing outside of that anti-static bag. Let's see what we've learned about the things that we should have in our A+ tool bag. Our first question is, what indispensable tool can provide you with voltage and continuity information? Well, that's the Swiss Army knife that we have of electrical use, and that's our multimeter. Our second question is, what's the best way to transport electronic components? If you're taking them from one place to another, it's best that you put them inside of an anti-static bag. And our last question is, what tool facilitates the testing of network communication ports, the sending and receiving of data going through those ports? How can we test those without having some piece of equipment? Well, we need a loopback plug. That's exactly what can help us there, so that the data that we send out should be exactly what we see come back to us, and that's a great way to test whether the port itself is something that's working properly. That covers what we needed to know for our A+ tool bag, our 22702 section 1.4, where we've gone through all of these different tools to understand what we can have in our A+ tool bag to help make our troubleshooting process that much easier. If you'd like to see any of our absolutely free A+ videos, you'd like to participate in our message boards, or just send me a message, you can visit our website at freeaplus.com.